Hello, in order to make a universal artificial intelligence, body language interpreters would have to define each individual action of a human. Each movement, each gesture, each tonal inflection, each topic choice, each word choice, based upon that human solving three distinct problems: consumption, reproduction, and peripheral. Peripheral problems are no more than interim steps before a life form has to return to the first two goals of consumption and reproduction. In this video, we'll look at how and why advanced deductive reasoning steps form and why humans are able to walk and talk and build schools of thought around large concepts. We're going to look at sentience, what it is and what it means. And with this channel, I'm hoping to convince you that we can perform absolute body language interpretation. We'll be performing basic behaviorism with no elements overlooked. To do this, we have to place things within an appropriate perspective. We have to develop a proper terminology with our observations. These are subjects or speakers using language to solve distinct conversational problems within meetings, which are also within schedules. As we observe a meeting, we'll be looking at each elemental action of the scene participants, and when it's all said and done, we will have connected every action to every genetic predisposition. And please, I'm not joking here. I'm talking about a universal artificial intelligence, a machine that understands anything that any human being is doing at any time. Not only does it understand humans, it understands any action of any life form anywhere in the universe or any other universe. To produce this fail-safe system, a system which doesn't have to be a neural net or some other form of mysterious black box, the program must be constructed with the understanding that humans are life forms that pass through hundreds of millions of years of development in pursuit of only three goals: consumption, reproduction, and peripheral. To define what a human being is doing at any given moment, we have to look at the beginning of life. This is going to get a little tedious, and I may make a mistake here or there, but we have to attempt to describe individual changes in the DNA. At first, life only consumed and reproduced. That's all it did, all day long, day after day after day. Then after about 3 billion years, that schedule changed. It moved, likely pushing itself from one position to another. This random act, caused by a random gene sequence, would be a peripheral interim step before returning to the first two tasks of consuming and reproducing. We could say that it's had an initial genetic propensity for movement. Because it's in a new position, its chancing at consuming and reproduce improve, and this new genetic code is maintained in the offspring. It's a new component in the schedule of life that, for at least a brief moment, has nothing to do with consumption and reproduction. It's really just a matter of semantics and naming something as peripheral. When a peripheral behavior leads to some sort of consumption or reproduction behavior, you can also call it a consumption or reproduction behavior. These are just labels for organizing the goals of life. The next development in movement would likely be the sensing of food and moving towards it. Certainly movement could have occurred simultaneously with the sensing of food. The life form could be adjacent to food and turn into it. But if there was a period of time when an indicator of food is first sensed and the subject moves before consuming, then this life form would be solving a peripheral problem. It would be making an association between a property of a food source and the actual food source. From this original tracking behavior, a huge collection of predator-prey relationships developed. With time, the life form could improve its ability to turn and change speed, all based upon the environmental cues it receives. And we have to keep in mind that every new action has a corresponding gene sequence. Life has a right turn gene, a left turn gene, a gene to make you speed up, and a gene to make you slow down, so to speak. Things happen incrementally. An individual behavioral element and its corresponding genetic coding happen one at a time, and one doesn't exist without the other. Step by step, peripheral behaviors modify with time. Life could also move as a response to an injury. If it moved because of an avoidance of an injury or a response to some other negative environmental condition, it would be solving a purely peripheral problem, a problem that is perpetually separate from consumption and reproduction. It survived what would have been a mortal encounter, a mortal event, and this in turn, at another moment in time, allowed it to arrive at a reproduction event. In short, this life form is solving a peripheral problem of avoiding a mortal event. This particular behavior forever altered the daily schedule of life. For the most part, from that time forward, with subsequent generations, life would solve for the primary goal of reproduction first, avoiding a mortal event became the second most important goal, and consumption would be a third. The priorities of life are permanently reordered. Now life is fully defined. Life does not and will not ever be found to do any other category of actions. It will not work towards any other goal. Consumption and reproduction are the first two core biological functions that lead to a direct repeating of the DNA. Peripheral behaviors such as movement and survival happening by an arbitrary random action caused by an arbitrary random gene sequence. If it provides a species with a statistical chance at achieving a reproduction event, then the mutation repeats rather than perishing. And these are only the first two forms of peripheral actions. A big subcategory of survival would be stress reduction. If the subject reacted to a particular stimulus, and this reaction, as arbitrary as it might be, improves the life form's ability to reproduce at a future moment, then the life form would be solving a future mortality problem. Life isn't so much performing an action to avoid a direct mortal event, but a probable mortal event. And so far, we still only have mechanical life forms. This subject doesn't have a nervous system, so each action is a product of a long, complex chemical chain reaction. It's like a punch card system in advance of later life forms having more of a computer-like system. We're very different from them, but the problems we solve are governed by these same core problems. Our need to consume or reproduce and avoid mortal events is paramount to our way of thinking. You can see that when human beings are in communication. Our conscience answers to our primordial punch card system. Then life developed a neurosystem. Neurosystems likely developed as a reaction to an injury, pain, because success is a matter of speed, and an electrical signal is faster than a chain of chemical reactions. And after a neurosystem appeared, life developed a much better sense of touch. It began recognizing vibrations in the water, and it developed a rudimentary ability to see its world. In short, the neurosystem began to reason with larger collections of environmental cues. Subject senses a particular packet of stimulus from its environment. It passes through a rudimentary decision tree, and then it reacts by affecting an internal chemical reaction that, in turn, does something such as move from point A to point B. With each action and reaction, we can consider our subject life form as working through a figurative conditional statement. If this, then do that. Consuming for food that passes through a series of associations. First, it smells the food. It sees sand kicked up around some rocks. And it knows from previous associations that a rock outcropping can contain a food source. Based upon the remembering of these associations, the subject comes to a decision to linger and swim around a rock outcropping. This is sentience, albeit one small spark of sentient behavior. Sentience is just a fancy name for connecting the dots of many different previous associations and joining them under one big epiphany. It's coming to one superior decision, which is the result of many other subordinate decisions being proven true. It's a passing from subjective thought to more objective thought and achieving a higher level of intelligence. A social act is another notable peripheral behavior. In simple, discrete form, a social act is when one species member assists another member in solving a consumption, reproduction, or peripheral problem. Originally, life was not social. Each species member solved its own consumption, reproduction problems without regard for the other species member. Then some initial act of social behavior occurred for the first time, likely a mating behavior in tidal pools. From there, social behaviors were slow in developing. The early development of sexes involved a brief moment of mutual problem solving before the participants went on their separate ways. Young were left to fend for themselves. Later, this developed into some assistance from parenting to offspring, such as the coveting of eggs. We can observe several types of social behaviors that are happening currently and the difference between them. Some spiders give birth to young and have zero interest in protecting the eggs. Outside of mating, there is no social behavior. Other spiders may lay eggs into an egg sac in a hidden location before moving on to dying. This will be minimally social behavior. Yet another kind of spider closely guards an egg sac in their webbing, and when the eggs hatch, they'll climb onto the back of the spider. And there are even more social species that develop colony-like behaviors. When observing a human doing a social behavior, we have to understand that this developed from a lengthy process of predecessor species passing through these kind of steps one by one. When a neighbor waves hi to another neighbor, this is an extension of an event happening about 100 million years ago, when earlier life passed from a clan behavior to a herding behavior for the first time. Herding behaviors later developed into more formal pack behaviors, then tribal behaviors, and now we're in a modern society where a human forms a connection with another human for a potential of solving some sort of consumption, reproduction, or peripheral problem. Let's take a closer look at a series of peripheral modifications. And again, this is going to get a little tedious because we have to nail down how life changes from one generation to the next. We have to be able to explain how our conscience, our sentience, happens. Here we're capturing a primordial life form at a moment of specific genetic change. She's slightly different from her parent. Her genes are telling her to find a rock crevice to lay eggs into, but she has a new unique genetic propensity to choose a rock crevice that has swifter currents. By sheer chance, a new genetic state, more of her offspring are able to survive the event because a greater current means greater oxygen reaching the eggs. The peripheral behavior of choosing a nest with swift occurrence is sustained in the genome of the offspring. And the peripheral behavior always begins by chance. When she was a fetus undergoing her first cell division, she could have been hit by an errant gamma ray from outer space. It could have entered the cell nucleus, altered the DNA, and whammo, she became a mutant. Or it could be a simple mistake in the forming of the DNA, a lucky mistake that caused this new gene sequence to appear. In any event, a new arbitrary random genetic propensity is born. And that's just one genetic change, one adjustment to the egg-laying process. Then many generations later, a new mutant chooses a spot with much swifter currents. Even greater levels of oxygen cause more eggs to hatch. And now we have another small adjustment from another singular change in the DNA. Now a range of possibilities are starting to emerge. After that, another genetic change leads a member to choose even swifter currents, but these currents are too fast. The eggs are probably washed away, and this genetic change fails to continue. Now the range is complete. From this point forward, this species has a particular range of currents that appear optimal for laying eggs. But it would be safe to assume that this life form hasn't quite achieved an objective viewpoint of the egg-laying process. It's not a large conscience meshing hundreds of cause and effect scenarios and saying, this is likely going to help my children. This line of species has only determined a range of optimal decisions with this one task. The emotion of empathy hasn't been born yet into the genome, and it doesn't care for the eggs in any other sense. When a peripheral behavior is first established, it's rarely observed in an objective fashion. To achieve such a moment of sentience, many associations must become relevant to the life form at the same time. Let's say that the subject species has a nesting process down to a pretty large range of noticeable shapes and various other conditions. But another mutant has another genetic propensity to return to a previous nest where she's had optimal results. The subject still hasn't arrived at a true sentience in relation to the rearing of offspring, or at least the carrying of eggs, but the scope of the task has expanded. The subject is using multiple disciplines from multiple decision trees to arrive at a reproduction event. Then, another series of mutations spur a range of nesting behaviors to counter predators. This line of species seeks nests that are farther away from areas where predators dwell. Now this line of species is starting to have some sentience in relation to this problem. It may even have some of the smallest primordial versions of positive and negative emotions weaved into these behaviors. But I believe from here, social behaviors are slow in developing. Schooling behaviors and more extended courtship rituals are probably starting to occur, but this is little more than species members lingering next to each other in an opportunistic fashion. They're mostly congregating near the resources that they all seek. For life to achieve greater levels of sentience, it needed more time to develop. Here an amphibian goes to a good spot on land to lay eggs. Instead of moving back into the water, it has a new random genetic propensity to linger next to the nest. When the eggs hatched, it continued to linger next to the offspring and accompany them on their route back to the water, all the while eating many of the insects that would come up to eat the offspring. This is a major leap of sentience, but there's still a little bit of flavor missing. This subject is still not doing much more than a new schooling behavior, except when choosing who to school with is choosing a juvenile offspring rather than another random species member. It's likely that the first iterations of this behavior would be so similar to schooling that parents don't do any other interacting with the offspring. A parent might even lose track of its own offspring and escort another parent's child. Again, this is the very beginning of clan-like behavior that still teeters on the edge of being subjective rather than objective. It's more primitive than developed. The subject assembles and passes through less deductive reasoning steps rather than more. With a little bit of jockeying for resources, one subject might perform the first small act of assisting its young in achieving those same resources. Another big leap. Hang on, these guys are getting really smart. Still missing a little something. With time, parents and offspring linger more and more, and parents learn to habitually assist their offspring. They share food regularly. When avoiding predators, they start to run for the same shelters. And the period of time that parents linger with their offspring is extended. The young are given time to develop certain skills. Then, an amazing new development occurs. For some time now, each member has been acutely aware of their own personal danger. Now the parents not only look to avoid their own mortal events, they seek to help their offspring to avoid a myriad of dangers that could happen. Bam! This is a huge level of sentience. We've arrived at the first hint of a mammalian-style conscience, even though true mammals are a long ways off. This is likely the point where the emotion of empathy first occurs, along with the counter-emotions of sadness by loss. Juveniles are now working through a development period before they're ready for adult-level tasks. There's a juvenile period and there's an adult period. Piece by piece, bit by bit, the human conscience is forming through these individual moments of genetic change. A new age of social animals began. The time that juveniles spend in parental care moved from days to weeks to months. Family units began forming. Interspecies competition changed from individual against individual to clan against clan. In addition to predator-prey relationships, these species had the added need to outwit their cousins. New random gene mutations would emerge, be tested against environmental conditions, and if they succeeded, it became the new rule. Collections of deductive reasoning steps grew and grew and grew.
Mammals were small when they first arrived. They had faster metabolisms and shorter lives. They had higher rates of genetic change and more ways to counter their environment. Then an opposable thumb emerged. A subject could now grasp an object, hold it, and move it. Primates could travel across the ground as well as through the canopy. Over time, primates moved into the apex predator position, the most objective, intelligent, sentient position, while spending their every waking moment and sleeping moment solving the core problems that life faced from the beginning.
Note that I could be off on my timeline or sequence of events, but my point is, when we're doing body language interpretation, we can explain what's happening and prove what's happening based upon axiomatic gene changes as they would have occurred. Individual sparks of sentience occurred sequentially in the developing of the human conscience, and now we have a modern human world born out of this base framework of deductive reasoning. Let's do humans.
Laura, what are you going to be when you grow up?
A doctor.
What kind of doctor?
A cardiologist.
What does your brain do?
Does you think?
What does your larynx do?
I does you
Helps you.
talk.
And what do your lungs do?
You breathe.
Here an AI or behaviorist would have to view the participants of the scene for what they are. This is a social meeting happening between two species members. This is a human who's rearing an offspring, which solves a reproductive problem. The act of rearing offspring is a reproduction behavior because a human juvenile is born defenseless and it takes him about 20 years to reach an adult state. So the mother and elders created this sheltered, protected environment where she could have a meeting with their daughter. As the meeting begins, although it's not at the forefront of thought, the first problem the mother can be considered as solving is the ancient problem of avoiding a mortal event. In every millisecond, she's solving for this problem by confirming that there are no immediate dangers to her daughter and herself by monitoring the surroundings. If, for example, they were to come under sudden danger, she would cancel the rest of this meeting, grab her daughter, and get to a safe location. We don't think about it because we usually have a very safe environment, but this is integral to the ongoing schedule. Consequently, an AI, which is just a human tool solving human problems, would be assisting its subject species in solving their life form problems with the same prioritization desired by that species. An AI in service to its family would, as its humans prefer, constantly scan all possibilities to confirm that there are no current dangers. Just as a mother would quickly grab her daughter to escape a fire, the AI would also quickly warn them to immediately evacuate the premises, and then it would perform any physical action needed to protect them from harm. It would also give preference to saving the daughter first and the mother second. Once that item is checked off the schedule, within another millisecond, the mother confirms that her and her daughter are properly consuming, breathing, and of good health. If not, the schedule would quickly modify to attempt to solve those problems. This would be the next layer of near-term problems, which starts to fall under the peripheral category of near-term stress reduction. And this would be the next set of items addressed by the AI. An AI would be delegated to a specific owner, and this autonomous program would look to assist that owner in reducing stress. Human beings watch for immediate and near-term problems, and an AI in service to humans, being a tool of humans, would solve those same problems in the same desired expected order. The AI would be heavily prioritized to assisting the delegated owner with their local problems, but it would be slightly more prioritized to assisting the larger group and the species as a whole. Essentially, there are a few more top priority rules like helping the species to survive through the generation. After immediate and near-term mortal problems, the mother would be addressing far-term problems. Beyond this meeting, the mother has a larger schedule where she plans on possibly working at a job to earn money, resources, or she may be doing chores around the house to protect existing resources. She and the other elders are making sure that they have food to eat, shelter, and the many other common necessities. In short, we could say that she's prioritizing all future consumption, reproduction, and peripheral problem solving within a larger schedule. This meeting is a subordinate function of that larger schedule, and she'll likely attend issues of that larger schedule within this meeting. And you see what we're doing here. We're looking at the stacked problems as they naturally occur. The mind rolls through these thoughts with the strict rule of answering to the primordial punch card system first. Reproduction and avoiding a mortal event are given strict priority in that order in most cases. In fact, if danger suddenly happens, the mother would almost certainly give her life in order to save her daughter's life. Then once these sudden danger items are handled, the mind moves on to handling other dangers across the future schedule. Then, after stress is under control, humans can engage in lighter moments of more relaxed peripheral problem solving. And note that with this video, I'm going to get into a lot of detail because I wanted to square away a lot of nuts and bolts of body language interpretation. Then in other episodes, we can build upon these premises. Just remember, we're talking about mammals, humans, life forms solving life form problems.
Lauren, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Now we're at the foreground thoughts, where she's asking her daughter about a possible future scheduled item, where she might gain employment, procure resources, and avoid stress. The mother puts together lingual elements to express a subject and a predicate, which in turn expresses an action. She is presenting a conversational topic of, figuratively, what are you going to do for work when you grow up? A speaker's communication can be measured for volume variation, and subsequent peaks and troughs, as well as tones, tone variation, and their abrupt change. Overall, the mother's tones and volumes are nominal for what we would expect in this situation. She starts with a middle tone, then a high tone on what, then she dips to lower tones before raising back up to the middle. The ending is, of course, raised up in tone, marking this as a question rather than a statement. Her passing through this question quickly,
Lauren, what are you going to be when you grow up?
being very articulate and saying it with a slightly undertoned excitement compared to the norm, shows a demeanor of drawing her daughter into a more intellectual frame of thought. She's negating all other emotion while accentuating the measured excitement about academics. Note that the AI will be doing comparisons of similar humans doing similar problem solving in similar situations, both real and simulated, and it will measure this event against the aggregate of those events. The tones and volume levels observed here will be compared to the prevailing tone levels used in similar situations. This is what we're really doing as we're talking with each other, and that tells us the excitement level of the meeting, the vigor at which each problem is being solved. I'm heuristically coming to a conclusion that the mother is urging more maturity rather than less because she's not too varied with her tones across the phrase compared to the average for this type of situation. If the mother had more varied tones, then she would be more playful and loose with her daughter, suggesting a more relaxed view about the resourceful side of this conversation that they're about to get into. An AI would come to the same conclusion, except it would do so in a more precise, non-heuristic fashion. Again, current AI programs can't do this. They're not universal, and their output comes from machine learning systems. The AI being proposed here can be constructed in a classical computer system. It could draw upon machine learning systems, but at its heart, it must be classical.
Lauren, what are you going to be when you grow up?
The daughter takes a bait. She's quite excited, but it's a focused excitement. The second speaker accepted the conversational topic of the first, of what are you going to be when you grow up? She's anxious to answer, but she's also in mid-range tones because they're moving into the body mode of conversation. And her mother also quickly responds, keeping the momentum going. Keep in mind that the daughter has a different set of priorities. Compared to the mother, the daughter's schedule would be much less resourceful and more for the sheer positive emotional effects. Given the chance, she might plan on ice cream for breakfast, spend all day at the park, and go to bed at midnight. She hasn't had a chance to learn the large schools of thought around being more resourceful.
What kind of doctor?
The daughter speaks quickly after her mother's question, then she's in high tones across the word cardiologist after drawing out the word. The other thing that's happening here is she's tilting her head down with each syllable, with the biggest tilt on the last syllable. This is a quintessential definition of an emotion. An emotion is when a life form simply exaggerates problem solving. If she were very monotone, monovolume, and stoic in appearance, she would be like an earlier life form solving a problem without emotion. However, her species developed this trick of training juveniles into the adult world by having them seek this positive emotion. Lesson by lesson, the mother uses the daughter's quest for positive emotion to teach her how to solve adult-level problems. The substance of the conversation, the information being accessed with the positive emotion, involves the conversational topics and subtopics and the human subjects that they reference. The main topic of the meeting is, what are you going to be when you grow up? And its answer, a doctor. A subtopic would be the type of doctor or cardiologist. Each conversational topic, as it's being used here, doubles as the motives of the speaker, the problem that the speaker is trying to solve. It almost always involves an emotion, and it always involves an action. A topic would be a key discrete state of the speaker that supports the purpose for the meeting. At the same time, they're referencing the human subject of medicine. The daughter plans to become skilled under this human subject to both achieve resources as well as help others by helping them avoid stress and mortal events. Subjects, as the term is used here, are collections of facts that work to solve a collection of human problems. We could go back in time and look at the axiomatic scene of two mammals using a poultice and cite that as the original instance of a subject of medicine. We could pinpoint probable genetic mutations that advance this peripheral behavior, such as an early human wrapping a wound with fabric. Then we could trace the development of wound stitching and surgery through to the modern advancements in medicine.
Lauren, what are you going to be when you grow up?
A doctor.
What kind of doctor?
Cardiologist.
What does your brain do?
Don't you think?
The mother pivots on the word and then picks a new subtopic under the current subject of medicine. Again, if we were describing what's happening here to an AI, we could easily reference the first time humans discovered that the mind, or the brain, is where people think, which was about the 1600s. On that day, we achieved another layer of sentience and furthered the field of medicine.
What does your brain do?
Don't you think?
What does your larynx do?
I guess.
The daughter stands up here, possibly to jar her memory. It's almost a way of saying, hang on, just a minute, I got it. Then she mispronounces a word because she doesn't remember the answer. Her mother says,
Helps you?
with drawn out tones on the word you, which spurs the daughter's thought process. The daughter checks her memory further, and she quickly and proudly says, by placing a real high tone here, she's proposing the conversational topic of, figuratively, I came up with a good answer here. This is a pinnacle moment in our conversation and in this meeting. She learned her first words from positive reinforcement. She learned of subject-predicate combinations from positive reinforcement. She's in a 20-year-long process of learning how to pick conversational topics based upon positive reinforcement. In essence, although she has solitary core problems like consumption and reproduction, which can happen without lingual elements, the foreground thoughts that describe these actions are constructed based upon this positive emotional effect found in social interaction. Please tune in for the next episode where we take a deep dive into positive reinforcement.
And what do your lungs do?
And she then exaggerates another answer by drawing out the word breathe. She has a large exaggerated smile. This exchange can be considered as both peripheral and reproductive. The mother's primary motive is figuratively providing a lesson to her offspring. The daughter's primary motive is almost a sheer manifestation of positive emotion that's achieved during communication. She's more driven by positive reinforcement, but she's slowly learning of the larger resourceful and informational problems that she has to address during adulthood. Here's a scene where the subject is being completely peripheral in their actions. The performance and appreciation of music is a peripheral behavior. It's simply an emotional expression that mimics and often exaggerates the ebb and flow of human communication. Tones rise and fall in a repeating pattern that's recognizable across species members. Human music is the equivalent of a wolf's howl. It expresses emotion-laden thoughts. But what makes this pattern recognizable to both the speaker and us? Let's backtrack and look at both the development of language and the admiration of these repeating tone sequences. Likely from the time of invertebrates, life was aware of moments in the schedule. Some species might move to find food when it changes from dawn to dusk, or they might migrate at certain times of the year. At each instance, an association is made between a relative point in time and an occurrence that's related to that time. Then one day, a primate used a set of tools, a stick and a log, to express a repeating pattern. This was partly to mimic an instance of an alpha male banging a stick to show an excited manner, except this member did it differently. He repeated the banging in a rhythmic, continuous pattern. Another member also recognized this pattern and repeated the behavior. Because this repeating pattern means something to these subjects, they became more attuned to their schedule. They undoubtedly use this skill of primitive pattern recognition to solve other environmental problems such as fishing, finding fruit, or most importantly, the engaging of interspecies warfare. Later, this troop encounters another opposing troop, and some of the members remember that the enemy approaches from a trail by the stream. Those members position themselves to ambush some of the more omega members near the back of the group, while the enemy alphas are busy chasing the friendly alphas. The attack requires proper timing to be effective, and because these members have a strange hobby of tapping on logs, they time the attack with the best of precision. After the battle, the enemy troop is driven farther away, granting the succeeding troops the rights to a larger territory. The genetic propensity of wanting to maintain a rhythmic beat is retained in the genome, while the opposing members that don't have the trait are eliminated. And here we have to take a minute with a sensitive topic. A life form develops a new peripheral behavior when a random mutation performs an action that allows it to survive, while other species members perish in most cases. This is essentially the definition of a peripheral behavior, that improvements happen at the cost of displaced members. When one species member has a genetic propensity to impose a mortal event upon another, that would be an additional environmental test that each member must overcome. Right or wrong, it's how mammals develop so quickly in cognitive ability. Because I'm suggesting this, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm just a messenger telling you of a rock-solid rule of nature, that the fittest in relation to the environmental problem to be solved is the survivor. This is true whether it's a one-on-one competition of early life or an act of warfare between humans. Now, because of this rule, one might suggest that an AI should be constructed to help eidetic humans engage in genocide on non-eidetic humans. Then once they're eliminated, the survivors can begin government-mandated eugenics programs. This would be wrong. This could be proven mathematically wrong because it's a misunderstanding of the environmental problem. Modern humans are different from other animals, and they face a unique modern environment. The one rule, the primary rule at the heart of this proposal for a universal artificial intelligence, is that the program is to assist the human species in surviving all dangers and living with minimal stress through the generations, century after century, millennia after millennia, deep into the future, when the last generation is on the last planet orbiting the last star at the end of time. With only a few key exceptions, namely the laws of the governing country, which includes an absolute transparency law, this is the primary directive of this proposal for a universal artificial intelligence. To achieve this feat, the key humanitarian rules that are already put in place, thou shalt not kill, love thy neighbor, and the many other rules of Magna Carta and the U.S. Constitution, are necessary for us to pass through the next few centuries and beyond. I believe that once it's up and running, the AI of this proposal can pass through sound simulations of billions of humans in cause and effect scenarios, and it can conclude with mathematical proof that the free societies that we already have in place are the correct self-governance for reaching this last planet. It could also conclude that any mortal competition between humans, where the smarter warrior wins, would only be a temporary victory for that genetic state. And here's why. For one, the member that was killed may have an answer to a key environmental problem. That is, we all work in different areas of problem solving, and we depend on each other to cover certain areas of the environment. One person may be an accountant who's good with numbers, another might be an architect who's good with shapes, and another might have a fascination with agriculture. We're a phenotypically diverse species where members join together to solve problems that we must solve together or perish. Another reason mortal combat is wrong is simply because of the important humanitarian rule of not doing that. If one person unalives another without repercussions, then anyone can unalive anyone and society breaks down. Again, I think there's sound mathematical evidence for these basic rules that we already have in place. Humans do need a relatively benign form of interspecies competition. Our current capitalist system, which is also the de facto system of the world, is that system. It isn't perfect, and all efforts should be made to keep it fair, and all efforts should be made to ease the difficulties of not succeeding in that system. But there's no better form of maintaining a robust human genome. In short, Nazism and eugenics are the wrong system. Runaway socialism and communism are the wrong system. And fair capitalism is the correct system. The propensity for maintaining a rhythmic beat on a log continued and modified with time. Members would practice this behavior with exuberance. Of course, not all the mating stayed within the troop, and this propensity for rhythm slowly disseminated into other nearby subgroups. The troop grew larger and larger, and a few generations later, it goes through a civil war. Now independent subgroups experiment with small changes to the log tapping behavior, as well as new battle tactics. Of course, howling and vocalizations came first, but now they had to be practiced with more astute timing. When a recognizable series of tones became cherished by 2 or more members, it became an important bonding event. All the while, they started to mix some of their first words into the songs. They would fold in many additional meanings similar to the way a wolf's howl means more than one thing. And some of the tonal inflection rules we use today were born from this back and forth banter between early primates. When a singer came to lower tones and lower volumes, it could be an expression of sadness or a conclusion of a conversational topic or an idea. It could also be a way of proposing a tentative idea. When coming upon high tones, the speaker suggested a triumphant movement or a key conversational topic or a point of anger and bravado. A faster pace of a song can also express excitement, while a more relaxed pace expresses a contentment. The changes in pace, the changes in tone, and the lowering of tones near the end of a song also express the different parts of a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Vocalizations closely mimic the burgeoning language being transmitted from human to human and vice versa. Greater levels of sentience happened alongside a recognition of this music structure, and as usual, the more sentient objective subgroup would apply this skill in warfare, and the more intelligent and physically capable of the two groups would win. Time and time again, humans constantly met each other in war to see who was more developed. And a funny thing happened with the arrival of a printing press. Humans had a new amazing ability to network information. One could read another's peripheral problem solving, and they could add new deductive reasoning steps from a different perspective from a different part of the world. Instead of one person solving a problem, 2 or more could join in and troubleshoot the same problem. If someone were to tell a story with a song, another could reproduce that song through sheet music and expand upon the concept.
I love taking naps with my pixie.
He's singing with low tones and a slower pace because this denotes a leisurely time, an intimate time, a poignant moment of being with a family member rather than a fast-paced song that suggests competitiveness, trial, and triumph. Notice that he's not forming the chords with his left hand, he's only strumming the open strings, yet it still sounds musical because the timing is on the mark. The last word, pixie, is drawn out, suggesting the point of the most emotion.
I love taking naps with my pixie. Pixie, I love you so much.
His next phrase explains the reason why he loves taking naps with Pixie, because he loves this fellow clan member. I'm not sure that the previous phrase was the first line of the song, but it does resemble the first item that one might mention in a meeting. If one species member engages in a meeting with another, and the second member doesn't know why, then the first will mention something like, "Did you fix a car?" or "Have you talked to the customer?" or "I need to get dinner ready." They'll say something to explain the purpose of the meeting. This second phrase elaborates on the subordinate facts of the previous phrase, and it falls under the same low tones as the first phrase because of the repeating nature of music. A piece of music, like a wolf's howl, is more of an expression of emotion rather than the rigid change of events as in a normal conversation. He's very sharp in his mood to make this expression. He's obviously influenced by other performers to follow through on a tune with a performance. But he's also thought up this wording in this pattern to express a great deal of ideas. I could be assuming too much, but as he brings up the issue of the pet being sick, he turns to look to the parent, which may mean that he hopes that they don't get too upset with Pixie when this happens. Music is just one form of abstract leading-edge peripheral behavior. Artwork is another. A member engaging in these tasks is far removed from resources, but there's always a connection, otherwise the action is completely ambiguous. A painter would propose a new thought through a new choice of brushstrokes or a shape of a figure. A musician would suggest a new spin on an older archetypal story through a unique new tone pattern that arrives at the same pattern-ending low tone. Someone would view this work, notice a change, notice a new improved view of an idea, and they might invent a better loom or a better mechanical clock. The country of this new loom would have its people clothed in a shorter amount of time. Their army would benefit from this new provision, and they would be more successful on the battlefield. They enjoy the spoils of war, gaining land and resources, and then they bear children while the opposing subgroup does not. Let's look at one more scene.
Just like I don't know what I'm thinking, because I'm embarrassed. I don't know what I'm thinking. I just don't.
So does that give you a right to be rude to people?
I don't know what I'm thinking when I be rude.
You know if you're rude or not. If I started yelling, would that be rude?
Yeah, but I don't know what I'm thinking, Tony. I'm too little, I'm telling
No,
you.
you're not
I'm not too little, but I'm kind of little.
You are kind of little, but you're
and my
very big
brain
little.
is... Do you know how little my bones are?
Yeah, I know how little your bones are, but I also know
They're
how...
probably like that little
Yeah.
and that long. And when they're that long, my brain is like that. My brain thinks like that. That's how little my brain is. And when my brain is like that, it thinks like that.
Now there's a lot to unpack here, so I'll skip over the fact that we're speaking of humans, mammals, a juvenile and adult, and that she's using language to propose problems to solve. What we'll focus on is the foreground thoughts.
Just like I don't know what I'm thinking, because I'm embarrassed. I don't know what I'm thinking. I just don't.
The subject-predicate combinations and their underlying functions allude to an event where she's apparently broken rules. They've apparently moved past some more serious confrontation, and she's starting to yield to an elder's direction. She's in lower tones, suggesting that she has some guilt. The tones are descending until they reach the lowest tone, don't, the proposed subtopic in conclusion to this argument, that she just doesn't know. I'm reading between the lines to call this a subtopic figuratively of I don't know why I do these things, because this is roughly the definition that any human observer would assign to these series of actions. In making an AI and teaching it to observe these situations, we have to first provide it with a platform of common definitions such as these descending tones in this situation lead to a proposed conversational subtopic. This is a proposal by the speaker to highlight the word don't as the center action of the conversational problem she wants to solve. Through extensive case studies of many humans making many similar tone patterns in similar situations, the AI can check this determination, build upon it, and make the link with the other words to make a more formal subtopic of I don't know why I do these things. I'll use the word figuratively because I'm a human coming to a conclusion heuristically. However, an AI would come to this conclusion systematically by passing through thousands of case studies.
Just like I don't know what I'm thinking, because I'm embarrassed. I don't know what I'm thinking. I just don't.
Can a human being perform an action in an automatic way without knowing that they're behaving that way? Yes, kids especially are driven by positive emotions to solve an immediate problem without a knowledge of how those positive emotions are lost in future events if they make the wrong choice. While in a juvenile stage, they have to learn how their immediate problems of positive emotions are to be tempered against the larger schedule in front of them. Adults also have periods where they can act in an autopilot kind of a mode, such as when someone's inebriated or under the influence of rabies or a head injury. But for the most part, as one gains maturity, they have the ability to look at themselves and gauge their emotions for a given situation. In this case, she's apparently knowing of the rules she's broken. She agrees that she's imposed upon others, and she feels that she should be let off the hook because she acted in an automatic fashion. Just like, I don't know what I'm thinking. Then she claims to be embarrassed. Embarrassment does happen in a chain of succeeding emotions. For example, one could have their status questioned by another speaker, pass through a period of embarrassment because the accusation has some merit, then they could become angered and quickly act out. There's a chance this emotion played a role in this event, but I believe she's just making a bit of a quick assessment. She's repeating it a bit formally as if this is a common appearance, when it might not be what happened in this case. Note, when an emotion is mentioned here, I'm not talking about a rough estimate that an emotion is present. I'm speaking of a specific sensation of an emotion appearing with a specific series of sequential individual reasoning steps. When performing this kind of body language interpretation, we have to think of everything in quantitative form. Everything is measured and nothing can be generalized. She's also generalizing when she says, I don't know what I'm thinking. Sure, she's not viewing her own behavior in quantitative form, but we as observers must have everything quantitative. This is a big topic for another time because humans do generalize continuously as they speak, and it often affects their perception. Generalizing is one of the many fallacies of logic, like tu quoque arguments, ad hominem references, and circular references, etc. Every one of these must be ironed out on the spot when reading body language.
So does that give you a right to be rude to people?
The elder gives a simple reasoning test suggesting, although you're driven by these emotions, is it right for you to impose upon others in an attempt to force your status higher? He's referring to long-established rules about not imposing one's status improperly. A member can be competitive in games and sports and business, but they can't be competitive in an unfair, physical, or mortal manner because our modern society will not survive into the future if these rules break down. A child being competitive is very healthy. It's important that they figure out ways to go after resources, but they have to obtain those resources fairly.
I don't know what I'm thinking when I be rude.
No, if you're rude or not.
If we were to codify a central rule to prevent one species member from competing unfairly against another, a singular rule by which we would define right from wrong, and from which all other rules would disseminate, it would be that no member may impose upon another member. If one member were to take the last piece of bread without asking, or take a parking space while someone else is waiting, or if a speaker was to raise their voice to speak over another, these would be the smallest of impositions. If one member were to push or hit another member, or worse, these could be more serious impositions. Over the course of many millions of years, we formed this rule, checked this rule, and now we have a modern form of this rule recognized by the legal systems of the free world. In this instance, she's apparently broken the smallest of rules, and with reprimands and reasoning tests, she'll learn where and how she can be competitive, and she'll also learn the value of being fair. One species member being fair to another is a bonding event leading to those members having future moments of mutual problem solving.
If I started yelling, would that be rude?
Yeah, but I don't know what I'm thinking, Tony. I'm too little.
Here she strikes a moment of objectivity, where she looks at her own level of development. She's claiming that she's too young to know better. By posing this argument that she's too young, she's showing that she's objective enough to notice her own developmental level. Notice that through this exchange, she maintains almost non-stop eye contact with the other speaker. She's looking to see if his face turns to a more forgiving and more forgetting demeanor. It's as if the first speaker to turn their head away and lower their tones would be conceding the debate. She's hoping that they can move on from this conversational topic, and she's being sure not to look away or down first. Note that another trick that she's doing is she's passing through reasoning steps in a quick succession to hopefully overwhelm her adversary. Also, she slips with a slight smile. This is another spark of objectivity, sentience, where she's thinking a bit of a surreal thought of, I'm in the middle of a debate and I'm doing pretty good. This exchange is a little fun for her. Unfortunately, it's not helping her argument to be too young to know better.
You are kind of little, but you're
And my
very big
brain
little.
is... Do you know how little my bones are?
Yeah, I know how little your bones are, but I also know
They're
how.
probably like that little
Yeah.
and that long. And when they're that long, my brain is like that. My brain thinks like that. That's how little my brain is. And when my brain is like that, it thinks like that.
The scene concludes with her continuing to argue the point that her development level is at a point where she can't control her actions. She presents other points of reasoning suggesting, if my bones are little and my brain is little, then I might be too much of a juvenile to know not to be rude. Again, she's showing that she's smart enough to know better, and her intelligence is making her lose the argument. The human mind developed from billions of years of trial and error. We started out solving consumption and reproduction problems, then we developed the first peripheral behaviors of movement and avoiding pain. At first we were biomechanical systems, then we changed to a neurosystem attached to a biomechanical system. Life was able to step through abstracted decision trees in advance of taking an action. Those decision trees became more complex, yet they always lead to a consumption, reproduction, or peripheral solution. Because humans had a complicated world to learn, and because they had to pass through a juvenile period, the human conscience is driven by a collection of positive emotion goals. Through a 20-year process of solving for this positive emotion solution, humans learn incrementally, step by step, how to achieve solutions to adult-level problems. The fabric of human thought is derived from these billions of years of development towards these solutions, and this is why people think like that. I leave you with this. The Oxford Dictionary defines cognition as the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experiences, and senses. If I may be so bold as to say that this is wrong, it's just too ambiguous, it's too general. It mentions nothing of the problems to be solved and how they're solved, and how our sentience is really a side effect of this process. What is the reason why someone acquires knowledge? What is knowledge? A more apt definition, I believe, would be the mental action or process by which a neurosystem passes through reasoning steps to solve consumption, reproduction, and peripheral problems. That's it. The human mind does nothing else. To describe it in a more elaborate form would be to introduce ambiguity. And sentience would just be a simple label that we apply to a moment of an epiphany, where many decision trees converge on one newly formed fact. Our sentience is only a byproduct of this cognitive process. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next episode.